Hi, this is Miss Esker, and today we're going to practice answering a question about a text in this format. I'm hoping this is familiar from last year with this APE format, so let's quickly review that. Does anyone remember what the A stands for? That is when you answer the question. What does the P stand for? When you prove it with textual evidence, and textual evidence is just something from the passage that you're using as proof. What's the E? It's when you explain how this answers the question. We're going to go through this in a little more detail, and then we're actually going to add a step since you're in 7th grade now, and you're going to be pros by the end of this. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a practice question. You will not have to write your own of this question, so I just want you to pay attention to how to format it. So our practice example question is, during what time period do you think the dinner party took place? Before I write anything, I kind of need to just brainstorm. So I might be like, well, do I think it's in the present right now? Well, no. Do I think it's in the future? Definitely not. There aren't any like robots or anything in there. Well, so it must take place in the past, and I'm going to try to even narrow that down a little further. I don't think it's as far back as like, the 1700s. It's probably the early to mid 1900s. So I spent some time brainstorming, and now I am ready to start writing with my A. I'm going to answer the question. Now, when I answer the question, I want to actually use keywords from the question that they gave me. And I want to be formal and give credit where it's due and include the author and the title. So my question was, during what time period do you think the dinner party took place? So I'm going to pull some words from this. Probably took place. I want to get words from the question. So I'm going to get the words from the question and the author and title in there. And there are several ways you can phrase it, but I decided on this. Mona Gardner's The Dinner Party must take place in the early to mid 1900s. Let me double check myself. Yes, I used keywords from the question right here. I answered the question, and I have the author and the title. I can get the author and the title in there in different ways. I could have said, in The Dinner Party by Mona Gardner, the story must take place in the early to mid 1900s. So there's not one way you have to do it. Now, after I've answered that question, now I have to prove it with something from the passage. So that proof can be quoted, where you take it word for word with quotation marks around it to show you're taking that straight from the passage, but it doesn't have to be quoted. You can also paraphrase it, which means I'm going to put it in my own words. And actually, I would encourage you to put it in your own words. Students tend to do better. They tend to explain it better when they put it in their own words. So I'm going to emphasize textual evidence does not have to be quoted. It can be in your own words. It can also even be implicit, meaning maybe you made an inference. Maybe you took what you read and figured something out. It's also going to include an in-text citation, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. Here is my example of how I am going to prove that it takes place in the early to mid 1900s. You'll notice I have a combination of parts in my own words and then a small quote, and those quotation marks mean I'm taking it word for word, just that little piece that's quoted. So here's my example of my proof. One of the characters in the story is a colonial official, and the footnote tells the reader that a colonial official is a person holding a position in the British government ruling India. So there's my proof. Now you might be asking yourself, what was that number at the end? Well, that is my page number for where I got the information. Now, the story of the dinner party is pretty short, so it's either going to be on page 1 or 2, or it might span both of them. And if that were the case, I'd put 1-2. But this part was on page 1 of my story. That is called an in-text citation. It's showing where this came from. And I would do that whether I'm quoting it or whether it's in my own words. Okay. Now, if it's not already clear where it came from or which story it came from, then I would also put the author's last name. So I could have went ahead and put Gardner 1, but since it's already clear, I already put the author's last name at the beginning of my paragraph, I can just leave it at 1. However, let's say I'm comparing 2 stories and it wasn't clear which story I was talking about. Well, then I'd put the author's last name and the page number in parentheses. Okay, now if I just left it with that information about the colonial official, my reader would be like, well, yeah, so what? I have to explain how this answers the question or why this is the answer, how my textual evidence proves it. So after my proof, I'm going to explain how that answers the question right here. Britain ruled India until almost 1950. So it makes sense that the dinner party would take place sometime before 1950. Okay, so that's my explanation of how my textual evidence answers the question. Now, if you were in 6th grade, you'd be finished. You had your APE. But actually in 7th grade, we would encourage you to actually do APE, PE, okay? Try to think of 2 ways to prove it. I had 2 main ways to prove it, so here's what we already just went through. I answered the question, I proved it, I have my textual evidence and then my page number, and then I just explained Britain ruled India until almost 1950, so it makes sense that the dinner party would take place sometime before 1950. Now, I have another piece of proof, so I'm going to add a transition like also, or another example is, and then I'm going to prove it again. So here's my second piece of proof. Also, the setting must be early to mid 1900s because the characters are arguing about whether women have the same nerves as men. You'll notice here I have 1-2 because that spans both pages. That's my in-text citation. After my proof, I'm going to explain. This sounds like it is during the women's rights movement. In many countries, women earned the right to vote in the early 1900s, but it was a time when many people disagreed about women's roles. This sounds a lot like the men in the dinner party, again affirming that the story takes place in the early to mid 1900s. So I had my second piece of proof and my second explanation, and then I kind of felt like it wasn't fully ended, so I added a little bit of a wrap up at the end to make it feel like my response was finished. Okay, so this is technically APE, PE. Okay, I went through APE once and then I added another proof and another explanation to make it more advanced and more detailed. Okay, so you're going to follow this format, APE, and then you're going to go back to PE with a second way to prove it. Now, you're going to try it with your own question. Okay, so here's the question you're going to be answering, and it's an opinion question. So it doesn't matter which way you say, as long as you prove and explain it. So here's your opinion question. Who reacted better, the scientist or the hostess? Now you might be like, well, they both did something good, but I want you to decide who do you think reacted better? So step 1, do a little brainstorming and think, well, who do I think reacted better and why? So brainstorm for a little bit. And I want to show you, first of all, how to open the assignment in Schoology. So when you're in Schoology, you went to courses, you went to English Language Arts, you clicked Unit 1, and then it's in Lesson 4, APE for the dinner party. And when you click on Lesson 4, you see both of these. The first one is the lesson that I'm going through right now. But what you want to click on today is Assignment, APE response for the dinner party. Go ahead and click that. And if it doesn't already connect to your school email account, you might have to click on your email account again to sync it. Then you'll start working on the assignment. And reminder, once you've completely finished, you'll have to click Submit so the teacher gets your finished assignment. But when you click on this and you connect it to Schoology, you're going to get a sheet that looks like this. Now, it reviews up here what to do. You'll also have your link to the story of the dinner party, so you don't have to click back and forth because you're going to need it for your textual evidence. And here's your question. Who reacted better, the scientist or the hostess? Now, I reminded you along the side what we'd like you to put here next to each box. You're going to answer the question, prove it, explain, and then we want you to come up with a second way to prove it again, and explain. Now, in the future, we want you to try to make it flow actually in a paragraph, but this first time, we're going to leave these APE, PEs on the side so you can practice forming your response. Now, I'm going to get rid of my full screen and show you a possible way to do this. Reminder, for my A, I need to answer the question, and I have to use keywords from that question and include the author and the title. So there are several ways I could get the author and the title in there, but again, the author is Mona Gardner, and the title's The Dinner Party. So I could say, In the Dinner Party by Mona Gardner, Or I could say, Mona Gardner's the dinner party. I just got to get it in there somewhere. And then I want to take words from the question. It says, who reacted better, the scientist or the hostess? So I could say, the scientist or the hostess, whichever you think. Actually, I might just leave a blank here, whoever you think. The scientist or the hostess reacted better. Okay. Now, I have the author, the title, and I took words from the question there, reacted better. That came straight from the question. So you can use this format right here if you want to copy that down, but make sure you put who you think reacted better here. In the Dinner Party by Mona Gardner, the scientist reacted better, or in the Dinner Party by Mona Gardner, the hostess reacted better. Once you get your A, you're going to go on to the P. Okay, I have to come up with something from the text to prove it. So I could say, for example, the hostess or the scientist, and then I'd go on and prove it with what they did. And I'm not going to do it for you. I want you to go back in the text and find something that would prove what made the scientist or the hostess react better. And after it, in parentheses, I'm going to put the page number. Then I'm going to have to explain it and say, this shows the scientist reacted better because, okay, and I can word that in several ways, but I have to prove it and then explain how my proof shows that they reacted better. Now, once I get down here to the P again, I'm going to have to start with a transition. So something like also, or another example is when, and then fill in the blank. What's another way they showed they reacted better? And explain it. Okay, so those are some starters, but you're going to have to finish it and figure out, well, how are you going to prove it, explain it, and prove it again and explain it? So I'll turn you loose once you finish this whole sheet. Don't forget to click submit so that your teacher gets your assignment. And if you have any questions, please do email your English language arts teacher and we'll be happy to help. Good luck.